into RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
Hello, all you RBLR sports fans. This is James Knowles with RBLR Rowdies, and right now I am starting out the show nice and soft and quiet because as we go along, it's going to get a lot more exciting. We are here to discuss the last two games, and we're going to get into that soon. The best way to support RBLR Sports, just so everyone is aware, this is a free podcast. We just ask that you hit the subscribe button whenever you're listening, and obviously follow us at RBLR Sports on social media. As I said, though, right now we have two games to cover, so we are going to get into that. Leo is still not here. He is having a great time on vacation, and we wish him all the best. I actually have a guest host here, Chris Hockman. You are here to discuss the indomitable Rowdies with me. Tell me, how are you feeling? How's it going? Everything. Tell me what's up.
Yeah, great to be here. I hope Leo's having a great time on vacation. But yeah, it's obviously been a great week for the Rowdies. Really exciting week. For myself, I came to covering the Rowdies from USL. I actually was the staff writer at the USL League office. Came there from being a beat writer for San Antonio. So you might remember me if you followed the old NASL edition of the Rowdies, because I covered San Antonio FC. So I covered a lot of Rowdies games back then too. And that was after years and years of working in soccer in Australia. Worked for the Central Coast Mariners in the A-League. So if you've been looking for an A-League team to support, Central Coast Mariners, we're garbage nowadays, but you know, there's a lot of similarities to the Rowdies. Three-sided stadium right on the water. What's not to love?
Cool. I really like that. And I didn't realize that you were a Mariners fan. I don't have an A-League team that I support, but I do like to follow and see, who's coming out of the league, all that kind of stuff. But that's all really cool. So, yeah, that is your background in the quickest possible format. And everybody listening hopefully knows me by this point. So instead of going further into that, we are going to discuss these two games that happened over this past week. The first game was an away win to Charleston. The second, a win at home to the New York Red Bulls 2 team, the Baby Bulls. And just to quickly look back at our predictions, I said that we would have a 2-1 win away to Charleston and a 4-0 win at home. Eureka was the other host with me last week. He predicted a 2-0 win away to Charleston and a 4-1 win away from home. Neither of us got anything right because the Rowdies ended up winning both games and actually blowing somebody out of the water here. So let's get right into this analysis for the first game against Charleston. Charleston, we started off with a 3-4-3 lineup, and that was with the usual back line. Aaron Guillen, Forrest Lasso, Jordan Scarlett, everyone knows them. Evan Loro sitting behind. And then in front of those three, we had Max Lakowecki, Lewis Hilton, and Connor Antley. In front of them were Lawrence Wyke and Leo Fernandez, and then Juan Tejada and Duba. Steven Dos Santos up top. Now, like I said, they did move into a 3-4-3 as the game went by. I actually spoke with Neil Collins about that after the game. He said that he had expected Charleston to come out in a 4-4-2, and ultimately they also did line up in a 3-4-3. But it didn't really seem as though there were too many big chances going through the first half of the game. Chris, what did you see as the game progressed in the opening stages?
Yeah, it was definitely very tight. I think the change of shape, Neil talked about, I think makes a lot of sense. You see that there was this adjustment. There was this surprise at how Charleston came out. I don't think expecting the 4-4-2 was out of line. But 3-4-3 is pretty heavily favored these days by everybody. The way Charleston did it and the way the Rowdies shaped is a little different from each other. So Charleston's 3-4-3 is two attacking midfielders behind a striker create the front three, whereas the Rowdies have two up front with a central attacking midfielder, so a number 10 traditionally. And I think that shape gives them something else going forward. Their 3-4-3 is surprisingly very strong defensively. Threes at the back aren't often very defensively focused, but the Rowdies, especially in Charleston, really played their hand defensively. And that's how they got this win. And what's interesting about that is how much that changed between the two games.
Yeah, absolutely. We will definitely get into that more, but the defense was certainly the focus of the Rowdies' tactical setup in this game, as you said. And unfortunately, though, with Max Lakawecki starting on the left, he ultimately did go out very early on the game with an injury. So we did have to switch things up a little bit. Sebastian Dalgar came on. And throughout the game, though, it did lead to some different things. This new formation that we were trying out. Leo Fernandez was kind of up on the left wing, and he was dropping back a fair amount to come and get the ball. But I spoke with Neil Collins about this afterwards, because I think that the two people who had brought this up to him after the game had mentioned, Leo Fernandez seemed to be almost freed up in this game, and he was running up and down the wing. He was trying to get on the ball as much as he possibly could, and it was just really cool to see that there's something even more to his game than what we usually see. We obviously generally see Leo Fernandez doing a lot on the ball and getting involved heavily in the attack, but if you allow him to just run with the ball at his feet, and he doesn't necessarily have to worry as much about his defensive responsibilities, then it does also allow him to do things that we don't usually see. And I think that is a totally different side to his game from what we usually get. And that's just really cool to know that he has that in the bag, so to speak. And we also saw Lawrence White dropping a little bit deeper, and there was some pretty high pressing to start. Ultimately, though, it did get into the second half where all of the action picked up. And I'll leave it to you, Chris, to break down what you saw coming into the goal that we ultimately scored.
Yeah, I think really opening up with the possession. Passing could have been a little better going in, but they really tightened things up as the half went on, and I think they got more and more confident, and that allowed the goal to come through. We saw how strong the players were in creating that opportunity and creating the space. Like, really, the whole win was about space. And we talked about Leo. I think Leo Fernandez getting all that space that he had really helped set this game up and set up the goal, even though Leo wasn't involved on the goal, obviously.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make, is that, when a certain player moves out of a certain area, then the person who's marking him obviously will have to follow him and make sure that he is still marked throughout the whole play that they're involved in. So if somebody can step into that open space, then they can obviously continue to create space as that chain moves of players following other players. And that is what we saw. Steven Dos Santos ultimately got the ball up on the top left of the penalty area. It wasn't actually inside until he got the ball and took a couple of touches into the box. At that point, he laid it off for Lewis Hilton, who one-time strike, perfect placement. And ultimately, he scored, I believe, his second goal of this season, and doing very well just to look the part. He is a player who has had lots of really good chances this season to get these shots off that I think fans have been begging for in, the Rowdies community. And when he does get these shots from outside the box, it's obvious that he can be deadly with them.
Yeah, I think that creating that space, the touches from Dos Santos drew attention. And when you've got somebody that can shoot from distance like that, and has been doing so without a ton of reward, when you have someone that can do that, creating that space to allow the shot really is going to help and help make that shot. We often talk about midfielders helping strikers make goals, but it works the other way as well, and that's exactly what happened on this goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, this is somebody who hasn't necessarily had a lot of reward in Lewis Hilton, and I really think that he has played so well for this team over the course of this whole season. I think that there's probably a case to be made, a not so small case to be made, that he could be our team MVP. But, we've obviously got a lot more of this season to go. In the meantime, when he's playing as well as he has, and he's contributing so much to both the defensive and the attacking sides of the game, and you don't see that he's on the score sheet as often, you kind of feel for the guy. And ultimately, in the last couple of games, he's done very well to get very good strikes off and put himself on the score sheet. So I love seeing that personally. But that wasn't the only thing that happened in the second half. We also had two pretty rough red cards there. Or I should say one pretty rough red card. Unfortunately, Connor Ainley got himself off with a studs-up kick that was, I don't know, almost at the opposing player's head. That's not exactly how I think anybody would, do that in the orthodox way in terms of, attacking a ball, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty easy decision for a referee. As a referee, those are the decisions that you love. Pretty cut and dry, easy red. You don't need much help on that one. It's a straight red. There's no denying. Only the most dyed-in-the-wool Rowdies fan would say that was not fair. And even then, you'd probably be on something to think that wasn't a red. Yeah, it was. I don't know what happened and how he thought his boot should go that high, but it did. I don't remember. Did they hand down an extra suspension for that, or is he just getting the Red Bulls game? I really don't remember seeing. USL's been a little slack in sending out their discipline report lately. But
yeah, unfortunately, I am pretty much in the same boat as you because all I've seen is the same thing that you just said. It's just the game for the New York Red Bulls, which we obviously played on Saturday. So if his suspension is already served, then that's all the better for the Rowdies, although I don't know that they're necessarily discouraging anybody else from doing that the way that the suspension ultimately worked out. But,
yeah.
Fair enough. Right after that, though, the Rowdies also ended up getting a red card on Charleston Battery. The player who ultimately got sent off, Leland Archer, he had received a yellow card earlier in the game, and while the Rowdies were wasting time with fouls, which, that is something that you do when you're getting on this further in the game, you're already 1-0 up, you're away from home, you just want to preserve the win. Obviously, that is understandable. Now, Lucky Mkosana turned Leland Archer, and he just pulled him back. And, I understand that it kind of would have been maybe a weak call, but if you're already on a yellow card, in my opinion, Chris, that's just not a smart thing to do as a defender. You got to make sure that, you're a little smarter when you are already on the cusp of getting yourself sent off. Don't give the referee an excuse to do that.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, there's no excuse. It's a professional foul, and so the referee is almost always going to give a yellow for that. Is it a little harsh? Maybe, but if it wasn't a first yellow, no one would call it harsh. And so, if he wasn't already on a yellow, nobody would call it harsh. And so I just don't think that as a referee you can go through that. And honestly, I refereed for a long time. I refereed at this level in Australia. You don't remember who you've given a yellow card to in the moment. For me, it's an absolutely fair second yellow. It would have been a yellow if it was a first yellow. So there's no reason to judge it any differently. It's a professional foul. It's silly. It's really silly. There was no reason for it. They had a man advantage, and to give that up in such a silly way, they really could have got back into the match, but they just blew the opportunity. And from then on, it allowed the Rowdies to really close it out.
Absolutely. And, that's actually some pretty good insight. I have never done any refereeing in my time involved in the game. So to know that, you get this far along and you kind of essentially, you have to go to check your own book to see who has received the yellow cards, who has not. That is something that ultimately that will affect what you decide. Because, as you said, if this were just a first yellow card, nobody would be complaining. And I think that that's perfectly fair. So that takes us to the end of the game. Ultimately, the Rowdies were able to hold their own for those last couple minutes when it was 10-10. And we go into the post game now. It was just a little bit of a note that I wanted to mention here. I spoke with Neil Collins about that scuffle that erupted as the game ended, and the whole time he had a smile on his face. It seemed like he had enjoyed the action of it, I guess, but at the same time, he did tell me that, their mentality when it comes to stuff like that is to just move right on from it. And I get that. That's what you got to say as a coach. You also got to be diplomatic, but tempers were flared. And I think that this kind of might go back to what we were saying at the beginning of this season when Charleston was kind of our bogey team last year, and they were the ones that we really had to worry about. I'm glad that this season hasn't quite turned out that way in terms of dealing with Charleston, but I think that there might be still some enmity going on from the previous year. Is that something that you possibly noticed?
Yeah, I think that stuff carries over, right? Especially these last 2 years where familiarity breeds contempt.
Yes.
They had to play Charleston so much last year. Understandable. We're trying to keep travel down. And then this year, again, they're going to see Charleston a lot. And so you get these, that's how derbies start. We don't really, there's Miami but they're not as competitive, is how I'd say that nicely. Charleston, I think, always give the Rowdies a really good game. And that's shown. Like, this match was really hard. And this is a side that, went on to do what they did on the weekend. So, they're a good side, which means Charleston, conversely, must be a really good side. So, yeah, I'm excited for more battles. There really does seem to be some sort of rivalry brewing here, and some bad blood. And these two teams don't tend to clean everybody out like a lot of the other USL teams do. So contempt can grow.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put that too. But that will cover us for the Charleston game. And yeah, it was obviously a lot to go over because there were a fair couple of things. But ultimately, everything that we covered is going to pale in comparison to what the Rowdies did in their next game against the New York Red Bulls. So before we get into any of that, I just want to go through the same basics that we did for the Charleston game. Obviously, the starting lineup here, want to cover it, and Evan Lauro, Jordan Scarlett, Forrest Lasso, Aaron Guillen. You guys already know that they're starting. That's just what's going to happen every game. So on the right wing, we had Sebastian Dalgard as the right wing back because, as we had just said, Connor Aintley was suspended for at least this game. If we see that that is more than just a one-game suspension, we will let you know as we move along in this week, probably via Twitter. Lewis Hilton and Lawrence Wyke were the two central midfielders next to him, and Leo Fernandez was back at his usual left wing back spot. Jan Ekra started in front of Hilton and Wyke, and then up top we had Sebastian Guenzati and Steven Dos Santos. So this is about the best lineup that the Rowdies can start at this point with Connor Aintley out, in my opinion. I think that we are, the best team with that group of players out on the field. And I think that it really started to show. The Rowdies were just hot out the gates. And ultimately, we got a penalty from Sebastian Guenzati that he put wide. Or no, I'm sorry, it was saved. It was something that was actually, the shot was saved. And, I think that I was at this game, and I think that a lot of the people in the stands were like, wow, I didn't expect him to, miss that, to not put it right in the back of the net without a problem. But ultimately, it was right after that the floodgates really started to open. And I don't know, what you saw out of this game specifically, Chris, but it just seemed to me that the Rowdies were playing at a totally different level from their opposition here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Red Bulls, too, you don't associate with capitulating this badly, at least in the early days of USL Championship.
Certainly.
Like, back in the day, this team was one of the strongest teams in the East. Now it's certainly shaped to be almost entirely academy players and not so much players on the fringes. But you've still got some really, you got some names there that are capable of doing things. Just none of them showed up on the weekend. So it was really surprising to see them struggle so badly. This year's been a really depressing year for Red Bulls too, honestly. I certainly expect more from them. They used to be one of the best two teams, and now they've just really faded off. I'm not as anti-two team as other people are, so it actually does disappoint me when the two teams do really badly, which is what we've been seeing in the Red Bulls this year.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I personally am of the opinion that, USL Championship did need some time to get to the point where it was mostly attracting independent teams, and I think, we're probably in mostly that time now that the MLS2 teams aren't as needed in terms of their financial stability, as well as the competition, as you just mentioned. But I think that their historic legacy in the USL Championship is something that we really shouldn't forget as fans. And fair enough if we do, but the other thing that we have to remember is that they're right now, we still do have to deal with a lot of players who are ultimately most likely going to contribute in this league moving forward. And I don't mean, the New York Red Bulls are going to stick around forever. I think that most people at this point in the game know that that won't happen. But I think a lot of these players may ultimately end up playing at this level. It's really difficult to say that, these guys are academy players, but they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And if you're already reaching this level when you're that age, I think that it's definitely fair to say you have a good future in soccer in America. You might play for MLS. You might even go to Europe. I don't know if any of these players specifically would end up doing that, but it's definitely fair to point at them and say, okay, that guy, he has a future at the USL Championship level. That guy is going to go to college and do well, and he might catch on with a team at the USL League One level. These are all definitely players who can do that. I don't want to shortchange them and say that they're, these are a bunch of amateurs, because even if they have the contracts for amateurs, they are definitely not going to stay that way the rest of their careers.
Yeah, I like that point. I think, you can make a career. There are plenty of guys that have flamed out at USL Championship and have made a strong career after doing that have made a living, a good enough living, playing in other places and even playing in League One. We've seen players go down there, build themselves up in League One and come back to the Championship in just 2 years of having League One. So it's definitely doable. And then, yeah, I like the amateur take. Like, really, this match had that professionals against amateurs kind of feel to it. And of course, these players have to be amateurs because they're not going to sacrifice college eligibility to play in USL Championship, let's be honest.
Right. At this point, they're not entirely sure that they are the one who's going to go professional at the MLS level. So if you want to go to college and see if you can stick it out there and get a degree before you move on, then obviously they'll have to do that. So it's something to keep in mind. But at the same time, I think that this was just such a difference in quality and class between the two teams. Ultimately, there were 3 players who ended the game on a brace. There were 2 players who each had 2 assists in addition to that. And I think that it was just, I don't even have too much in the way of, pure, this is what happened over the course of the game analysis. I'll leave that to you, Chris, but I was watching in the stands just more in shock and awe. I just couldn't believe that this is what was going on. And the fans were absolutely loving it. Everybody was dancing the whole game, it felt like.
Yeah, it was a wild game. It's you get these maybe once every couple years, a result like this. You've got to enjoy them when they come. It was like, looking back statistically at the game, it was actually surprisingly even for the scoreline. Statistically, the Red Bulls had more of the ball, and that possession doesn't mean as much in modern football as it used to. But you don't often win 6-0 and lose possession. You're usually going to have dominated every facet of the game when you win that convincingly, and they really didn't. They were caught offside too much. They gave away 5 corners. Like, there were definitely some issues here that other teams would have capitalized on. They gave away 23 interceptions. That is unheard of for a team that won 6-0. Their shooting accuracy was worse than the Red Bulls. Defensively, this was their worst tackle success they've had in a long time. It wasn't honestly, the Charleston performance was better in a lot of ways, except for the one that counts. But they overcame all of that because they were able to control the ball. And so, yes, they lost possession, but they won the aerial duels phenomenally well. They were 62% on aerial duels, which then lets you control the game. You control the first phase of play. You control where the match is played, and that shows. Almost the entire game was played in the Red Bulls half. The Red Bulls almost never got into the Rowdies' final third, and what little ball there was in the Rowdies' final third was, back passes to clear the ball out. Like, Evan could have just sat around and done nothing, really. There wasn't much to do for him, and it was all on this, we're going to control the first ball, we're going to control the breakdown, and then we're going to take it from there. And yes, that led to some weird things like giving away 23 interceptions, but almost all of those were in the final third. And so it wasn't giving away. Only one of them was in their own half. So only one of them was a chance that the Red Bulls really could have pounced on. It was interesting. Like, statistically, it's a really odd game. Because you look at it statistically and you just think, wow, how did that team win 6-0? You might even look at some of those stats and go, wow, the Rowdies won?
Right.
But they just controlled enough, and they did enough to really control the game. I don't think 6-0 is a crazy score and doesn't happen often, but to have the element of control that they had while still losing the possession battle, is they're a very well coached side, and this is a sign of that. This result really showed how well coached they are and how they handled things tactically, because they just absolutely, in so many ways, dominated the Red Bulls, and controlled them and forced the Red Bulls to play to their weak points, and that's what won the Rowdies this game.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, obviously, and the other part of it is, naturally it is played out in the scoreline as everybody saw. But yeah, the 6-0 is just what you said. It's something that is so rare in this game. I was going through the scores over the course of the whole weekend, and there was one other team that hit 5 goals. I think they won 5-0, and then Sheffield United beat whoever they were playing 6-2. So, this is not a common scoreline, obviously, in the whole sport. And I think that the fact that the Rowdies were able to do so against something against the odds that were displayed in the statistics of the final result, that's just, as you said, it speaks to the amount of or the quality of the coaching that they're getting. And I think that Neil Collins has a very bright future in this game, in addition to all of the players that he currently has under him. But we will go through that a little more. It was also good to note that Dayon Harris came back from injury in this game. So the Rowdies almost have a full complement of players for their whole roster. At this point, I believe we are missing one player, Luis Fernando, someone who unfortunately we have not seen at all this season. He was a player with Atlanta last year that I thought had done a couple of good things here and there. It was harder for him to get on the field at the MLS level, but I think that once he does return from injury, he'll have something to contribute. Unfortunately, we won't know that until that time. But of course, I don't know how much we need too many of the other players that would be available to us, or if we had signed anybody else, because we are absolutely roaring right now. And that is just so good to see. I spoke with Neil after the game on the press conference again, and he was delighted with everybody. I think that he mentioned some of the same things that Chris did in terms of the statistical side, where ultimately these are not necessarily problems in this game, or not necessarily problems overall, but something they need to look at and see if maybe it does need a little bit more addressing. And especially as the games come, when we're going to move away from home for the most part of the final couple games of the season. So, just as we mentioned, there is always stuff to look at and always stuff to analyze, especially if you are at the coaching level like Neil Collins is. But that should do it for our analysis section. And now we are going to move into the questions here. And I want to start with this one for you, Chris, because I don't know how frequently you watch the Rowdies, if it's every game or if you're covering, a lot of games that maybe you maybe it all runs together a little bit, but how fun are the Rowdies to watch? This is something that I asked Eureka last week, and we were just going back and forth. But from another outsider's perspective, from the RBLR Sports group, I wanted to see, what you thought of it as well.
Yeah, they're very fun to watch. I think what's really entertaining about the Rowdies to me is that it's a whole park effort. A lot of entertaining teams, it's really one side, and it's always the attack. That really impresses you and really stays with you. Like, I think right now, Phoenix Rising, if you watch Western Conference, is a great example of that. Really entertaining offensively. But for the Rowdies, it's a whole park effort. And I think that really, I love a good slide challenge. I love a good tackle that just takes the ball perfectly away. Everybody loves a good save, and I think in Evan Laura, they've got a guy that is good for that and is going to give you one top draw save a match. I mean, he's the best. If he doesn't win goalkeeper of the year in this division, I'd be stunned. But stranger things have happened. I've been in those discussions. You can blame me if you disliked anything a few years ago. But yeah, for me in the Eastern Conference, they're the most entertaining team. Yeah, Pittsburgh, they do well and they're good to watch, but there's just something different about the Rowdies. They might have a fight in the league as a whole when you look at Colorado Springs, Phoenix, teams like that. But in the Eastern Conference, I don't think you can go past Tampa Bay Rowdies. If they're on TV, you got to catch them because they're always a good team to watch.
I love that. Yeah, I felt the same way. And for any fans who are, trying to get out to games, I suggest that you do that. The atmosphere at the games as much as, it is very fun to watch them on TV, it is electric when it gets into the stadium and there are fans who are on the edge of their seat. When it gets up to 6-0, you might not be on the edge of your seat, but it's definitely party time, and it was a good time to see. So we will go to the next one now, which is essentially going back to the game with the New York Red Bulls. The 6-0, we did discuss the statistics side, and we said that, it didn't necessarily reflect the ultimate or the final score line, but do you think that was a score that was ultimately fair to the two teams that were out there and the two teams that showed up on the day?
Oh, I mean, it flatters the Rowdies. I don't think you could deny that they weren't 6-0 good. We'll get more into that, but they were good, and they were far and away the better side on the pitch. But yeah, I think 6-0 flatters them. A big win doesn't. Like 3-0, 4-0, I don't think would have flattered the Rowdies. But 6 felt a bit much. 6 felt like more than they deserved. But at the same time, the Red Bulls didn't really do much to stop it. And so maybe I'm talking myself around into this. Maybe I'm talking myself into saying, yeah, actually it was. But no, I think 6-0 flatters the Rowdies, to be honest.
Well, I think that that's probably a fair thing to say. As I had mentioned earlier, I do think that a lot of these players, they're going to do well in the future. But if this is the first professional experience that you have, like it is for the kid who was 15 when he started this season and, turned 16 over the summer, like it is for a couple of the 17-year-olds who have never played prior in this at the USL Championship level, it's going to be overawing. And, at a certain point, there might be games when it's so hard to put together that you ultimately do get these score lines that turn into 6-0. I do think, as you said, 6-0 is probably a bit of a blitzkrieg score. It's something that nobody was really expecting, something that nobody would have predicted, certainly. I know I did not, but it is definitely worth taking into, the data over the rest of the season and, comparing it to what the two teams actually produce on a weekly basis. And it might be a little flattering, but, obviously the Rowdies fans are going to take it at this time. And with that being said, do you think for Tampa, at least the Tampa Bay area right now, is this the best sports show in town? My money, with the Bucks coming back now and the Lightning out and the Rays trying to make it into the playoffs, I still think this soccer team is going to be right up there and probably pushing all of them for, the best looks in town.
Yeah, I mean, I think you factor in Ralph's mob, right? And you've got to add that to part of it. If you're going to a game in person, I don't think anything in town right now is going to beat the Rowdies. Now, the Rays are getting closer to the playoffs, and I think we got some really cracker matchups for the Rays coming in the close of the season as they close in on bringing another trophy to Tampa Bay. But yeah, I mean, the atmosphere is hands down the best in town, especially since the Bolts, who are probably the only other team that has a decent atmosphere, let's be honest, in Tampa Bay. Since they're not playing right now, for atmosphere, you can't get anywhere near the Rowdies. And I would say that even if the Bolts were playing, maybe if they were in the playoffs. But, regular season games, Rowdies flying like they are right now, you can't beat it. It's the best thing in town. And it's the best value in town.
Now, that's a good point. I do like bringing up the atmosphere when we talk about this, but that is something that I don't think I have specifically mentioned. That, I went to the game with my girlfriend and one of her coworkers, and ultimately, all of our tickets were $26 or $26 each. I shouldn't say that together. It was $26, but yeah, that's a very cheap ticket when you look at the sporting landscape in the area. And I think that is something that goes into deciding what ultimately is one of the best atmospheres out there. You don't really have to pay. You don't have to break the bank, so to speak, to experience what is a really fun time. And that is really good. But the other thing that I wanted to ask before we move into some questions that would be specifically for you, Chris, is at this point, watching the game, do you think that there's anything that the defense, that the midfield, that the offense, that any part of the Rowdies game, do you think that there's anything that you need, that you would like to see them improve upon at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one issue for the Rowdies throughout a lot of the year has been giving away the ball too much. I think they showed signs of that getting better against Charleston. They only gave away 3 interceptions, and then just completely blew it out of the water against the Red Bulls and gave away 23. So I'd really like to see the Rowdies keep the ball better. They just haven't been doing so well with that throughout the season, to be honest. I'd like some better judgment in tackling and in what they're going in for. They got beat too often against the Red Bulls. I know this is nitpicking because they won 6-0, but honestly, it was their weakest defensive performance I've seen in a while. And so I'd like to see that change. Keep the ball better. And the thing I'm always going to nitpick the Rowdies on, but it's super nitpicky, I'd like more variety in the way they attack. Often the Rowdies are too narrow. And I think part of that is because the pitch at our Lang is pretty narrow. But I would like to see more use of the wings. And it might be that they don't have the players, Neil sees these guys every day and knows what they're capable of. I see them once a week, maybe twice a week last week.
Right.
Maybe he just knows that that's not how this team plays and that's not how and who am I to judge when they're the best team in the league? But yeah, if you're going to improve something, I think you should always be looking at something. I would really like to see that wing play come into bear, and maybe the freedom that they gave Leo is a start in that direction. But yeah, I'd like to see more variety. My fear is when they play better teams, which is going to eventually happen, they're going to figure them out because they can be predictable. They can be too narrow sometimes. And I do think there's signs of that changing. We'll see how that plays out. Right now it's working. I don't know if it keeps working against stronger teams.
Yeah, and that's entirely fair. I think that having some more variety in the attack is something that fans have also been calling out for. I know that within the Discord chat for the Ralph's Mob group, that's something that you have definitely seen, people wringing their hands when the Rowdies were in their midsummer woes and everything wasn't really working out quite as rosy as it is right now. As you said, maybe we're papering over some stuff right now, and part of that definitely would be those 23 interceptions that we gave away. That is not something that we see even in most games for the Rowdies. If they are sometimes high, 23 is definitely different. But I hope that, as you said, if we can look at the two games from this past week at the same time, we're going to look at the Red Bulls game and say that everything in that game was kind of topsy-turvy. And then if we look at a little more a closer game with a little more relevance, data to the rest of the season, I think that Charleston hopefully will be the closer bellwether for how we're doing in terms of our turnovers, in terms of losing the ball and getting all of that, all of those different things that you mentioned involved in the rest of the statistical side that actually benefits us. So, Chris, there are some questions here specific to you because you keep a bigger eye on this league in general. With Leo and I, we mostly watch the Rowdies games, and then I try to watch as much as I can of the opponents. I can't speak for Leo, but I haven't been able to see as many recently just because there are so many other soccer games on. I'm trying to watch, World Cup qualifying. I'm trying to watch some EPL, some Bundesliga, some Portuguese league if that's on. But you have a very good background of knowledge in this league specifically. So at this point, what other USL teams do you think are out there that will probably or definitely pose a threat to Tampa Bay moving forward?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we get the match that we thought we were going to have last year, and it's Tampa Bay versus Phoenix again. Phoenix have established themselves in the West as a real serious contender for this league, and honestly, might have won last year. Which they've been fighting for and building for so long. They spent all that Drogba money and didn't really get much to show for it. But now they've kept building. I think a lot of us thought, Phoenix will fade once they lose that kind of talent. But no, they've just gotten better and better and better. I think all the challenges for the Rowdies really come from the West. Colorado Springs, Phoenix, Los Stokes even. But in the East, let's be honest, it's Lou City, right? It's always Lou City.
Right, yeah.
The road to the East, the road to winning the Eastern Conference goes through Louisville City. You're going to have to beat them at some point to make it through. And so I think the only team, for me, that I think could really touch Tampa Bay is, in the East at least, is Louisville. I think the competition in the West is much higher, and I think the East often benefits from that because the West just beats up on themselves all year and then comes into the final exhausted. So there's a benefit there because really, yeah, the East Pittsburgh, great side, very well coached. I just don't think they're at the level of Tampa Bay and Louisville. It's hard for me to see anything other than Rowdies, Louisville City in the Eastern Conference Final. But except that, I wouldn't be shocked if Pittsburgh came up and jumped ahead. They're very good at sneaking under the radar and just racking up results. They're not going to do anything that gives you a jaw-dropping result like the Rowdies did this weekend, but they could upset the apple cart and get in there. But realistically, if the Rowdies want to win the title, that road's going to go through Louisville, or Louisville's going to come here at least. Louisville will be involved at some point in making that happen.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and that does play out in the standings, which we will get to later on. But before we do that, based on what you just said against Louisville and potentially Pittsburgh, and hopefully getting to replay that game where we're ultimately up against the West Coast side, which might well be Phoenix, how far do you see the Rowdies going this year, and what kind of playoff expectations do you have for this team based on the play that we have been able to witness so far?
Yeah, I think you'd be disappointed if you didn't make the Eastern Conference Final. Just realistically, yes, playoffs are a bit of a crapshoot, and we're all Tampa Bay sports fans, so we know what happened when the Lightning came in as the number 1 seed. Sorry for reminding everybody. So we know that the playoffs, look, they're one-off games. They're against the best teams. Usually they're against teams that are prime. You look at the form right now in the Atlantic Division, and the top 4 have all picked up results their last 3 games. That's the kind of form you're going to be against in the playoffs. You're not going to be playing the Red Bulls who have 1 win and 5.
Exactly.
So it's going to be harder. But yeah, I think if you're a Rowdies fan, you'd be disappointed if they didn't make the Eastern Conference Final. I mean, right now they're the USL regular season champions. If the season stops right now, that's another trophy that goes in the trophy cabinet for Tampa Bay. It's a 2-point lead on Phoenix, but I think the East gives the Rowdies a bit of an advantage there. They all get to play teams like Loudoun, whereas Phoenix, they have to play the worst team in the West right now. Is Real Monarchs, whereas the East gets to play Loudoun. New York Red Bulls. You get those teams. So I can't see the Rowdies doing much worse than that, and it'll all come down to how they do the playoffs. But yeah, Eastern Conference Final. Anything less than that would be disappointing. I accept that at that stage it's a crapshoot, and if they lose, they lose. But anything less than that would be a big disappointment because they'll have beaten any teams they're playing on the road into that game. They will have beaten pretty easily.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. And I think that in addition, all of the Rowdies fan base will probably say just about the same thing. Everybody's going to be gunning for the league championship overall, naturally. And I would say the exact same thing. But if we're being as realistic about it as possible, then yes, the Eastern Conference Championship is definitely the lowest point that we should be aiming for. And I like that, that phrasing that puts it in a way that we can look towards the future while also saying, this is where it creates a benchmark. And I think that works out in both senses there. So now we're going to move into our hot take segment. This is something that Leo started, and we're going to continue it here with Chris. I want to bring up something that I see in particular with the defensive side here. Now, I did notice a couple of issues this past week. Connor Antley was having a couple of bad passes in the game against Charleston, ultimately before he got sent off. And it happened several times. I think I counted at least 3 where there was a ball that he meant to play that was supposed to be, a very simple pass, shouldn't be anything that was really too difficult. And then unfortunately it gives it away. I saw this from Jordan Scarlett as well. There was a moment in the Charleston game where he had some space in front of him, and he was able to carry the ball forward. And as somebody stepped forward to put a little pressure on him, it wasn't something that he shouldn't have been able to handle. He ultimately felt the need to pass it, and the pass was so rushed that he played it right off the field. So this is something that I would personally like to see some improvement upon where the Rowdies are. Obviously, we do have a very good possession side when we want to play that way, and the players that we have are capable of doing it. But what I really want to see is a lot of players take on the possession side of the ball the way Aaron Guillen does. And I see this a lot from Aaron Guillen, who was formerly a left back. I mentioned this in my hot take a couple of weeks ago, actually, that he will carry the ball forward and eat up some space and bring some attention to him. So somebody has to step to shut him down. And then at that point, he can play the ball into whoever is open in that space that the player just left so that they could shut Aaron Guillen down. That is something that I would like to see more from everyone outside of him. And I just don't know at this point if the players are, willing or capable of doing that based on the bad passing that I noticed here and there. These aren't, a very common thing, but it is something to notice. And if it's not something that the players outside of Aaron Guillen are up for, then I suppose that's fair enough. But I would like to see it at least in the games, that we have remaining against teams that are maybe, teams like Loudoun, teams like Las Vegas is the last game of the season, and they're not doing too well. Possibly this game away to Atlanta United, who aren't doing that well either. We have one more home game against the New York Red Bulls. Let's just see a little bit more passing from out of the back, or maybe even some dribbles out of the back from Jordan Scarlett and Connor Antley into space so that they can make those passes. That is my hot take, and I will leave it to you, Chris, to tell us what yours is.
Yeah, I don't think our offense is that good. 6-0, I don't think Rowdy's offense is 6-0 good. Not that it's bad, it's just this team is built defensively. I know it doesn't look like it. I know it doesn't look like this is a defensive team. They score a lot, they push a lot, but they've kept the most clean sheets in the league. They had a 100% tackle rate 2 weeks ago. They are doing some astounding things defensively, and yes, I had issues with it in the game against New York. But this team is built on the defense, and that's a good thing. I know it's not always the most exciting thing, but that's a good thing because that's what wins you championships.
I was going to say that is the old saying.
Yeah, defense wins championships. Just ask Italy in 2006. Just ask Greece when they won the Euros.
Yep.
Defense wins championships. And so that's a good thing, even if it's not the most exciting thing. The Rowdies' offense is good enough, is what I'll say. Yes, they scored 6 goals. Yes, this is an insane take. But it's defense. This team's defense forward. And if they can do what you were saying, James, if they can build that transition out of defense, because I don't think they're always the most patient in working it out from the back. If they can do that, they'll be unstoppable. If they can really start pivoting their defense into an attacking option, I would pity the rest of the league. But yeah, this is all about the defense. This team is phenomenally strong defensively, and they're just going to be so hard to beat. I think part of that's, when you have a guy like Evan Laura between the sticks, it's hard to beat. But they're the top team in the league in clean sheets, and it's not even close. They may already be, they're 3 games ahead of Charlotte. I don't know where all those teams are going to get enough clean sheets to make up that gap. So
right.
it's hard for me to see the Rowdies not having the most clean sheets in the league, which means they also have the fewest goals conceded. That one's a little closer. El Paso's only conceded 16. But to get to an Eastern Conference team, you have to go all the way up to 26 that the Riverhounds have conceded. So this team's defensive first. Yes, they're entertaining still, which I hope puts pay to that idea that you can't be a strong defensive team and be entertaining, because they really can be. And the Rowdies prove that. They are defense first, and I know it doesn't always look like that, but they are. They're responsible with the ball, and they're responsible with how they go about getting the ball back. I know it wasn't like that on Saturday, so it's a crazy time to be bringing that up, but they really are.
Well, I think that is also borne out not just in the results from this season, but let's go back a season and we had the same back line, we had the same goalkeeper, and it was pretty much similar results in terms of keeping a clean sheet and goals allowed. Ultimately, Forrest Lasso won the Defender of the Year. Jordan Scarlett was named to the second team All USL Championship. So those are definitely borne out when you look at the results that we have to point to for the players that are on this team. Their defensive aspect, their defensive capabilities are obviously through the roof. And I think as long as they can continue to maintain that presence, which will change when you're in a game as crazy as the 6-0 one, as long as they can do that outside and maintain themselves at the normal level when they get to the teams that are going to be tougher than the New York Red Bulls, then yes, I think that they have all of the potential in the world naturally. But that will cover us for our hot takes. And finally, we will move into the standings that covers everything that we have just been talking about. The Rowdies right now are first in the Atlantic Division. We have 49 points from 23 games. And in this division with us are Pittsburgh in second and Miami in third. Pittsburgh have 47 points from 25 games, and Miami have 41 points from 23 games. So those are teams to keep an eye on right now, and the amount of games that they have in hand or over us, so that we actually have some over Pittsburgh. Luckily, that also puts us in first place in the Eastern Conference. Louisville are currently on 44 points. That is from 24 games played, so they've played one more than us, and they have fewer points. That is something to tip our hats to. And then the Birmingham Legion have 40 points from 23 games, just like we have played. Now, all of that points to us also being the first in the league at the moment. El Paso currently have 45 points from 21 games played, and Phoenix have 47 points from 22 games played. They have a game in hand on us, so as it happens, they may or may not ultimately jump ahead of us when they get their 23rd game played, but we shall obviously have to see how that plays out. At the moment, it is nice to be sitting pretty like we are. And we have the preview for this upcoming weekend's game. This Saturday, September 18th at 7:30, we are away to Atlanta United 2. Atlanta United is the MLS team, and obviously Atlanta United 2 is their second team, which is again made up of a lot of academy players or players from the fringes of the MLS squad. They have 28 points from 23 games played. They currently sit outside the playoff zone in their division, which is not our division. They share that with Louisville and Birmingham Legion. There are some players that I wanted to go over for Atlanta United. The first one is Aidan Mcfadden. Aidan Mcfadden is a player who was just drafted this past offseason out of college, and he has been doing very well since he joined the Atlanta United 2 team. He's got 7 goals in 20 games, and that is from a winger/fullback position. He will, move as Atlanta shakes up their positioning, and that's still a very good goals return for someone who's playing outside of the role of a striker. I think that he is somebody that we will need to keep an eye out for. He will usually line up on the right wing, and so we'll have to see who ultimately goes up against him, whether that's Leo or possibly Sebastian Dalgard if he starts, and or maybe even Max Lakawecki if he is back from injury, because we do not have a time frame for that just yet. Another player that I wanted to highlight is Robbie Mertz. He is a player that they signed from the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, who ultimately plays as a central midfielder to a left winger, and he will again shift positions as Atlanta shift their starting positions for whatever game they are trying to play. There is another player who lines up for them up front. Connor Stanley is from England. He is actually from the Man United Academy. He is on loan from Man United to Atlanta, and he will play as a winger mostly. And often he has been playing in front of or in concert with Aidan Mcfadden, who I highlighted earlier. Really good players to keep an eye out on the attacking side. And there are 2 players I wanted to highlight defensively very quickly. Josh Bauer is another player who had been signed out of the draft from the college ranks this past offseason, and he's a very good player. I think that he is somebody that we will obviously have to get past to, try and win this game. And then the other one is Rocco Rios Novo. Rocco Rios Novo is a very interesting goalkeeper. He was born in Los Angeles and grew up mostly in Argentina. He is at the Argentine club Lanús, and he is actually on loan at Atlanta. So right now he is playing from them, over here, trying to get some experience. And the biggest thing that I wanted to highlight about Rocco Rios Novo was when he made his professional debut for Atlanta United. This was the first game he had ever played at senior level with adult men, in a real competition. And this was in the CONCACAF Champions League. So everyone knows the Champions League, and obviously the North American Federation has their own version of that. He made his debut against Alajuelense. They are a team from Costa Rica, and he came on at halftime for Brad Guzan, who had been sent off with a red card. I believe he kept a clean sheet on his debut, which was incredibly impressive for a guy who was 18 at the time, making his first start. And it was away to this Alajuelense side in Costa Rica. They were shooting over and over and over. It was amazing to watch him keep a clean sheet there. Ultimately, this was a two-legged affair with Alajuelense. It went back to Atlanta United, and he had to start the game because, of course, Brad Guzan got sent off and had to serve a suspension. He ultimately also won them that game, and they moved on to the next round. Atlanta United have since been, booted from that competition, but it was an incredibly impressive performance, and I am very excited to see him line up, even if it is against us. And those are the players that I wanted to highlight. Before we get that, this is obviously going to be like every other team. It's something that could be a tricky situation, but we will have to see exactly how it goes. I think that is definitely winnable, but of course the Rowdies can't keep up this streak forever. So I think that with all of that being said, I would like to get into our predictions here. And Chris, you have got probably a better understanding of the Atlanta United team. If you have anything that you want to highlight that I missed, let us know. Otherwise, let us know instead what your prediction for this scoreline will ultimately be.
Yeah, I think you nail it on the head with Rocco. Rocco Rios Novo is just a phenomenal goalkeeper. He's made 50 saves this year, just in USL Championship. We're not even counting the crazy adventure that was the CONCACAF Champions League. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be harder than I think people think it's going to be, because they're going to be hard to break down. I think there'll be chances, but ultimately I'm going to go out and say 2-0 because I don't want to get too ahead of myself. It's easy to predict something crazy after what happened on Saturday. I think one thing that'll help the Rowdies is they don't play midweek, whereas Atlanta United 2 does. So that, I think, will help. And we'll see how Atlanta manages their squad, whether they keep people out midweek for this game. Will be interesting to see. But yeah, I think just Rocco's going to be hard to break down, and that's why I keep it down to 2. It's going to be hard to beat him.
Right. Well, that is a fair thing to say, and I can understand. It definitely, as you said, it's going to be hard to beat him. He is doing extremely well for himself at this level. I think that he is catching some eyes based on the way that he has played, and I hope that he ultimately turns this incredible season for him, this incredible first professional season, into something bigger in the course of his career. But when it comes to the Rowdies specifically, I can't wish him all that well, of course. I do think, however, this game is going to be a little trickier, and I'm going to give us a 1-1 tie in the end. That is going to be my prediction for the Atlanta United game, and we want to get into our final segment now, just cover a couple quick things before we get you guys out of here. The next final 3 games are those games that we have, or excuse me, the next 3 games at home are the final 3 games we have at home. So ultimately, that is what we are going to, those are the only games that we will have to host before the playoffs start. If you have not been out to a game, you really should. These, like I said, you won't have much of a chance before playoffs, and I don't know how that is going to go in terms of, these one-off games. The Rowdies could obviously slip up at any time, as much as we don't want them to. And I don't know exactly how pricing will work at that point. So check it out. If you did go to this past game against the New York Red Bulls, you should get a discounted rate for the last 3 games. Definitely check your emails there. The one final thing that I wanted to mention on my side from going to this game and enjoying the sights and the sounds and everything that comes with it, the Rowdies players are absolutely great people. I can't stress this enough. They want to interact with fans. So after these games, this is something that I should have highlighted many, many times before now, but the game, when you win 6-0, obviously everybody's going to be happy and they're going to want to hang out with fans and sign things and take pictures and all that. I can understand it, but you wonder, okay, is that going to be the same for every other game when they're not winning necessarily 6-0? Maybe it was a much tighter game. Maybe they didn't even win. Yes. The Rowdies players are those guys, and they do want to do that. They want to hang out with you. They want to see you guys. If you're at the game, they will come and they will sign stuff. They'll take pictures. They're just awesome, awesome people. I really think that you should take advantage of that and come out and say hello to them if you can. So that is going to wrap me up, and I'm going to leave it to Chris. If there is anything that you want to plug, please feel free to do so here.
Yeah, of course. I can't echo enough. Get out to the games, enjoy yourself. Obviously, we're still in the time we're in, so do what feels right for you and do what feels safe for you. But definitely applaud the Rowdies on how they've done things and how they've dealt with things. Yeah, for me, you can follow me on Twitter at Chris H Sport. Is where I'm at. You can see my posts, Florida Soccer Report, flsoccerreport.com. And just, if you follow me, I'm going to post everything there. If you're into Paralympic sport, follow me. Did a lot of stuff talking about the US Open this week. So yeah, just, definitely get out to games. Follow me on Twitter. Stay safe.
Absolutely. I think that is a good call too. And that is something that I should have mentioned here. Of course, if you're not feeling it, I can understand that. I was not going to a lot of the games in the first part of this season due to COVID and my not having a vaccine until I did. And then obviously I had, as I mentioned, I had to hang out with family while I was taking care of someone who was sick. So now that I can, I have taken advantage of it. But if you are one of the people who can take advantage of the situation and go out there, I would suggest you do so. That will wrap us up, though. And so I want to thank you, all the listeners, for tuning in this week and every week beforehand. You can, of course, follow us at RBLR Sports. You can do that on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. You can also follow me on Twitter if you'd like to do so. I am always there to be yelled at if you would like to do that. I am there to be coaxed into taking your position on how the Rowdies are doing or any other team. You can get at me at RBLR James K. And if you have any questions for the show specifically, you can do that at our feed, or of course you can use the hashtag AskRBLR. Otherwise, please like and subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as YouTube and all other major podcast platforms. And with all of that being said, there's only one more thing to say. Come on, you Rowdies.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.